Normally, I would start a video like this with a grand question like, oh, what is evil? But this time is different. I need you to name three realistically evil villains, and three cartoonishly evil villains. You can pause the video to think about it. Okay, you have your six now, right? Now, can you point to the differences between these characters and their approach to evil? It's okay if you can't. Like, that's the whole point of the video. Well, cartoonish evil, as we know it, at least to me, does not exist. At least inherently. Bold take, I know, but let me explain. For definition's sake and the sake of the video, cartoonish evil is defined by its exaggerated and theatrical villainy, hence becoming, cartoonish. I don't think I need to define realistic villainy. If you are looking for that, then just turn on the news. Explain this properly, I'm going to use a framework I call the 4 pillars of realism. There's a reason people prefer villains like Sukuna and Kenjaku over ones like Naoya and, to some extent, Griffith. This has to do a lot with their victims and how their victimhood is actually portrayed. The concept of a victim is as old as the concept of a villain or a bad guy. Where there are victors, there will be victims. And how those victims are portrayed has considerate effect on how realistic a villain seems to be. Take Ryomen Sukuna, for example. Everyone loves him, despite him being a murderer, rapist, cannibal. But these same people would in the same breath hate on Naoya for his misogyny and implied rape of Mai. The point I'm making is Sukuna's actions, at least for the most part, are stated instead of shown. And even when they are shown, they are such grand spectacles that never really show the effects on an individual person. With some exceptions, obviously. Sukuna has a lot of weightless crimes under his belt. He blew up a lot of buildings during the Shibuya incident and killed hundreds, if not thousands of people. But those people had no connection with us, the audience, in any way. But on the other hand, we have Naoya, Tycoon Monster, Zenin. A lot of people do not like this guy, and I definitely understand why. There's a lot of things to dislike about him, but the most damning is his hate for women. I often relate his actions to the scene with Griffith and Casca in Berserk, whereby we get to witness this heinous act happen to a character. But the hate stems mostly from how it affects the said victim. The abuse at the hands of the Zenin clan molded Mai and Maki. From birth until the extermination of the clan, their characters have been different reactions to the abuse suffered at the hand of that very clan. Maki internalizing the hatred and using it as fuel to prove them wrong and ultimately destroying the clan. Her whole identity becoming this person who could prove them wrong, who would prove them wrong. While Mai went the opposite path. She hated the clan, she hated her sister, and the circumstances of their birth, and above it all stood Naoya, who perpetuated this system to keep them small and weak. This makes his own evil a lot more tangible, more realistic, because it's grounded and we have victims to grieve for. This is also why we find it easier to root for villains with grander goals like taking over the world or blowing up the moon or some dumb shit like that. Not because the goal itself is dumb. Well, not just because the goal itself is dumb, but also because at that scale, the evil is on such a grand scale that we cannot process the suffering it will cause. It's this paradoxical effect where the more people suffer, the less we're able to process that suffering and empathize with them. So it turns into a spectacle rather than a tragedy. The next pillar we have is one of attitude. The attitude one has towards evil contributes to how realistic we view that evil as. Let me explain. When we hear evil, we automatically associate it with negative things. Evil is cold, it's quiet, it's calculating, and above all, it is unnerving. Real evil doesn't look like...
You were right. I'll always be a villain.
Or at least evil as we think of it does not look like that. We internalize this expectation that evil is not good. So the moment we see childish or positive traits associated with negative actions, it makes the whole thing seem so comical and unrealistic. In other words, cartoonish. If I were to ask if Scar from Lion King or Dio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure would rather hate you, you'd easily say Scar because But if I ask who you are more likely to encounter in real life, I think that answer is obvious. This is what differentiates characters like Mahito and Ryu from characters like Johan and Friend. The latter embodies our perception of evil, which is also why children online idolize characters with these traits, viewing them as cooler than their cartoonish counterparts. The third pillar is means versus end.
Our time that you did this for the family.
I did it for me.
This is arguably one of the most important pillars I want to talk about. The goal of a character is one of the biggest factors in understanding or justifying their actions. For this example, I'd like to compare two very odd things, but stay with me here. I want to compare Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan to the whole manhwa genre of villains. I couldn't pick a single one for this example because of the concerning amount of stories in this genre that are just basically touched upon, where the villains, in my opinion, are unrealistically evil and very shallow. They are not really characters in their own right, just plot devices to give the main character a goal. This doesn't just apply to manhwa, however. There are manga like this, as well as, other stories. But manhwas are the biggest offender from what I've seen. But anyways, that's a video for another day. Eren Yeager. He's one of the most debated characters in modern shonen. And yes, Attack on Titan is a shonen. But his evil is actually very goal-oriented. He propagated the extinction of almost everyone on Earth to save his people. Was it understandable? Yes. But is it justifiable? No. Eren is a character who has done objectively evil things. But whether he's evil as a person or not is debatable. Moving on to the other side of the table, we have revenge manhwa and manga villains. There was a manga I read a while ago called Jujika no Rokunin, I don't know if I'm getting the name correct. But yeah, I even made a video on it on my last channel, but yeah. Let me read the synopsis. Jujika no Rokunin is a dark thriller manga centered on Shun Uruma, a young boy subjected to extreme bullying by 5 classmates who label him an experiment body. After the bullies kill his parents and put his brother in a vegetative state, Uruma trains under his grandfather, a World War II secret unit veteran, to enact brutal vengeance on them. Look, I can't lie, it is genuinely an interesting read, with really good art. But we cannot stand here and pretend we call this type of evil realistic. Admittedly, I dropped the manga after the amnesia part, but as of where I stopped, he killed all of his bullies but one. And spoiler, none of them had any tangible motivations for killing his parents and doing that shit to his brother. Look, I'm not saying every story has to be this complex, multi-layered, multi-dimensional masterpiece. And this isn't even a rant per se, but this kind of relates back to the earlier point with attitude. Evil for evil's sake is just plain psychopathic. This kind of evil feels more cartoonish to me than anything else. And it really just feels pointless, honestly. But again, I'm not denying the fact that this kind of evil does exist. There are people who gain pleasure from doing evil. It doesn't have to have a point. But at the same time, it does feel a bit over-exaggerated. The last pillar is portrayal. This is the most foundational pillar of evil, and the hardest one for me to write. It takes elements from all elements mentioned prior, but it is more concerned with how the evil is framed, or rather, presented. It has to do with specifics like the tone and music around those evil acts, and basically how aestheticized the evil is. Aestheticized. It has less to do with the characters themselves and more to do with how the world views evil. Take Despicable Me, for example. Its evil is cartoonish, not because it's a cartoon. Well, not just because it is a cartoon, but because it has elements from the last three, i.e., no lasting victims. Gru's attitude himself is comical, and at least in Despicable Me 1, if I remember correctly, the evil was not the means to an end, and the show would still remain comical even without these things, because the general tone of the show remains comical, unserious, cartoonish. it still uses lighter tones and takes leaps in logic for the sake of comedy. It knows its intended audience is children. Take Takopi's Original Sin as another example. A recent anime I cannot recommend enough. Although on the surface it looks like a wholesome anime, it is one of the most heartbreaking portrayals of abuse I have ever watched in anime. It has the initial 3 elements of evil, but where it mainly differs from Despicable Me is the portrayal of that evil. Similar to Despicable Me, its evil is uncaring. In Despicable Me, the evil has become a normal part of the world, having supervillain groups and people aspiring to even join them. It's become normalized. No one cares. While in Takopi's Original Sin, the evil is more grounded. Abusive parents, apathetic systems. The evil is uncaring, but these two differ extremely. One normalizes villainy to a comical extent, while the other showcases abandonment to a heartbreaking degree. The difference? Presentation. To close this video off, it was originally meant to be an essay on how our proximity to evil decides how realistic we feel it is, but it kind of morphed into this. I'm really happy with how this script turned out, even though I know it's not one of my best. But also, I've never said there were only, these are the only elements of evil to consider, but I do feel like they are the main ones, and I'd really like any arguments, whether you agree or disagree. I'd really like pushback or, confirmation on these things from someone who is knowledgeable. But yeah, I'm just trying to make better content, and yeah. Thanks for watching. Bye.